So we're going to look at two huge shifts in the JavaScript world. First, how it broke out of the browser and took over the server with Node.js. And second, how frameworks like Angular came along to try and bring some sanity to building complex web apps on the front end. Let's just dive right in. Okay, so what is Node.js, really? At its core, it's just a program that lets you run JavaScript outside of a web browser, like on a server. The really key thing to know is that it's built on Chrome's V8 engine. That's the same piece of tech that makes JavaScript run so incredibly fast in your browser. So Node had a massive performance advantage right from the get-go.
You see this phrase everywhere in the Node docs, event-driven, non-blocking I/O. It sounds super technical and complicated, but it's not. And honestly, it is the single most important concept to understand about Node. If you get this, you get why Node is so powerful.
Think of it like this. A traditional server is like a cook who takes one order, cooks the entire meal from start to finish, and then only moves on to the next order. Node.js is a different kind of cook. It starts boiling water for pasta, but instead of just standing there waiting, it immediately turns around to chop vegetables for the next dish. It never waits. When the water boils, an event tells the cook, "Hey, come back to the pasta." This non-blocking approach makes it ridiculously efficient for anything that involves a lot of waiting, like getting data from a database or reading a file from a disk.
For the longest time, JavaScript itself didn't have a standard way to split your code into multiple files. So Node just invented its own system called CommonJS. You've probably seen it everywhere, that require function. But now, thankfully, JavaScript has its own official standard, ES modules, which uses import and export. This is the modern, proper way to do it.
And this right here shows you how much the actual code has improved. On the left, you've got nested callbacks. This is what we used to call callback hell. And trust me, it was a nightmare to read and debug. On the right is the exact same logic, but using modern async await. It's clean, it's readable, and it makes the asynchronous code look almost synchronous. It's a night and day difference.
Okay, so we've seen how the language and the code style have evolved. But Node isn't just a runtime, right? It's a whole ecosystem of tools. Let's take a quick tour of the modern toolkit you'd be using today.
So first things first, you need a package manager to pull in all the libraries your project depends on. NPM is the granddaddy of them all. It comes bundled with Node, so it's the default. But you've got choices. PNPM is really popular now because it's super fast and saves a ton of disk space. And then there's Yarn, which came out of Facebook and really pushed for more security and reliability in your installs.
All right, now for the web frameworks. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, Express.js. For years, it was the way to build a web server in Node. But as this quote puts it pretty bluntly, it's getting old. It was built for a different era of JavaScript, before TypeScript and async/await were the norm.
And you can see that older design right here in the code. It's all based on this concept of middleware, which is basically a chain of functions that a request has to pass through. It's simple and it's incredibly flexible, but wow, it can feel a little clunky compared to the new kids on the block.
Now look at the difference with Fastify. See how it's using async await right in the route handler? Fastify was built from the ground up for speed. It's also designed with things like schema-based validation in mind, which helps you write much safer, more robust APIs. A lot of people consider this the go-to choice for new, serious projects.
And then you have the next wave. Frameworks like Hono are taking things even further. Their whole philosophy is about being tiny, ridiculously fast, and, this is the key part, running anywhere. Not just on Node, but on serverless platforms, on edge runtimes like Cloudflare Workers, anywhere you can run JavaScript.
So here's the paradox. If Express is old news, why is it still crushing everyone else in search interest? Is it just because there are millions of tutorials and old projects out there? Or is it simple, do-whatever-you-want philosophy actually a feature, not a bug? It's a really interesting question about how new tech actually takes hold, or does.
Okay, let's switch gears completely. While all this was happening on the server, the front end was exploding. Our web pages were turning into complex applications, and frankly, it was a mess. We desperately needed some kind of structure.
And that's where AngularJS came in. It was one of the first big, opinionated frameworks that said, here is a structured way to build your app. Before this, you were probably swimming in what we called jQuery spaghetti, just trying to manually sync your data with what was on the screen. AngularJS promised to fix all that.
This quote nails the core philosophy. Instead of using JavaScript to manipulate HTML, AngularJS said, what if we just made HTML better? It let you invent your own HTML tags and attributes that were tied directly to your application's logic. To really get why this was such a huge deal, you have to understand the main problem. With one-way data binding, your data could update what the user sees, sure, but if the user typed something into a text box, you had to write a bunch of code just to capture that change and update your data. It was tedious.
AngularJS's big trick was two-way data binding, and at the time it felt like pure magic. You change the data in your code, the input box on the screen updates instantly. The user types in the input box, your data in the code updates instantly. Everything was always perfectly in sync, with zero extra work from you.
And look how simple it was to use. You just added this one little attribute, ngModel, to your HTML input, and boom, the magic was enabled. For developers coming from the manual jQuery world, this was an absolute game changer. So, AngularJS was a massive success. But the web moves fast, really fast. New ideas were popping up, performance became even more critical, and the team at Google decided to do something incredibly controversial.
And, they rewrote everything. They didn't just release a new version, they threw AngularJS in the trash and started from a blank page to build a brand new framework, which they just called Angular. This split the community right down the middle and created a huge amount of drama.
And you can see why. The changes were massive. It went from plain JavaScript to TypeScript. It moved from a classic model view controller pattern to a modern component-based architecture. The entire way it handled performance was ripped out and replaced. It wasn't an upgrade, it was a completely different beast. And you can see that change right in the code. What used to be a simple, almost magical attribute like ngRepeat became this more explicit syntax, *ng4. The new way was more powerful and less ambiguous, but it definitely lost some of that initial simplicity.
And this is the core idea of modern Angular, and really, of almost every modern front-end framework today. Everything is a component. A component is a self-contained, reusable chunk of your user interface. It has its own HTML, its own styles, and its own logic, all bundled up in one nice, neat package.
So, when you look back at all this churn, Express giving way to Fastify, AngularJS being completely replaced by modern Angular, what's the real lesson here? The specific frameworks, the names, they're going to change. That's a guarantee. But what about the underlying ideas, like building with components or using types to prevent bugs? It feels like those are here to stay, which makes you wonder, what's the next big idea that's going to come along and shake everything up again?